The photo of my son and daughter-in-law sipping champagne on a Mediterranean cruise deck made my hands shake so violently I nearly dropped my phone. I stabbed the call button, fueled by the fury that had been building for exactly 8 days. When Jessica answered with her usual fake sweet voice, I didn't waste a second on pleasantries. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. My name is Olivia Richardson. I'm 67 years old, and 3 weeks ago, I gave my son and his wife $13.00 from my Italy vacation fund because they claimed dangerous debt collectors were threatening their lives. Now I'm looking at cruise photos of them living it up in the Greek islands, while I'm sitting in my kitchen in Portland, Oregon, staring at my empty savings account. The call went straight to Jessica's voicemail, which didn't surprise me. She'd been avoiding my calls since last Tuesday, when I'd asked for proof of these supposed debt collectors. My son Brandon had been equally evasive, suddenly too busy with work to return my messages. How convenient. I scrolled through more photos on Jessica's Instagram. There she was posing by the ship's pool in a designer bikini that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Brandon looked tanned and relaxed, holding up a lobster dinner that could have fed me for a week. And the hashtags made my stomach turn. Blessed life. Spontaneous vacation. Living our best life. Spontaneous vacation. My foot. You don't book a Mediterranean cruise overnight. This had been planned for months while they were bleeding me dry with their sob stories about Jessica's gambling debts and threatening phone calls from scary men. I'd been such a fool, but as I sat there staring at those photos, something Margaret always told me echoed in my mind. Olivia, when someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. Well, my son and his wife had just shown me exactly who they were, and I was finally ready to believe it. The doorbell rang, interrupting my rage spiral. I found Margaret on my porch holding a bottle of wine and wearing the expression of someone who had news. Good news. Judging by the gleam in her eyes, you look like you're plotting something, she said as she invited herself in as usual. I love that look on you. I showed her the cruise photos without saying a word. Margaret's eyebrows climbed higher with each swipe. When she finished, she set my phone down and poured herself a generous glass of wine. Well, she said finally, I guess we know where your Italy money went. I trusted them, I said, though the words felt hollow. Brandon had looked me right in the eye and sworn Jessica's life was in danger. Honey, the only thing in danger was their vacation fund, Margaret said, taking a long sip. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I stared at those photos again, feeling something shift inside me. The old Olivia would have cried, blamed herself, maybe written them an angry letter they'd never read. But the woman looking at evidence of her son's betrayal felt something entirely different. A cold, calculating fury that demanded action. I'm going to make them regret ever thinking they could play me for a fool, I said quietly. Margaret raised her glass in a toast. Now that's the Olivia I remember from our teaching days. The one who made Tommy Morrison cry when he tried to cheat on his spelling test. I picked up my phone and started typing a text message to Brandon. Short, sweet, and guaranteed to ruin his vacation. Buzz. Saw the cruise photos. We need to talk when you get back. 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. I could practically feel his panic through the screen. Good. Let him sweat for the rest of his precious vacation. He had no idea what was waiting for him when he got home, but I was wrong about everything. 3 months earlier, I'd been sitting in the same kitchen, surrounded by travel brochures and feeling more excited than I had since Harold died. Italy had always been our dream destination, the trip we'd promised ourselves we'd take when he retired. Cancer had other plans. Now, at 67, I was finally ready to honor that promise to myself. I'd saved meticulously for 2 years, adding every spare dollar to my Italy fund until I had enough for the 3-week tour Harold and I had fantasized about. Rome, Florence, the Amalfi Coast, Tuscany's rolling hills. I was going to see it all. I spread the final itinerary across my kitchen table like a treasure map. September in Italy would be perfect, warm but not scorching, fewer crowds. That golden light I'd seen in travel magazines. I'd even bought a new camera, something Harold would have teased me about, since I'd always insisted his old Kodak was perfectly fine. But the trip wasn't just about sightseeing. It was about proving to myself that I could still have adventures. That being widowed didn't mean my life was over. Brandon and Jessica had made enough comments about me staying closer to home at my age that I'd started to believe them. This trip was my rebellion against their expectations. Brandon had seemed supportive when I first mentioned it, though Jessica's smile had been tighter than usual. That's a lot of money for one person, she'd said, not quite managing to hide the calculation in her eyes. I mean, wouldn't it be more practical to do something local? I should have paid attention to that moment. Jessica never worried about my practical spending unless it interfered with her own plans. But I was too wrapped up in my excitement to notice the look she and Brandon exchanged. When they thought I wasn't watching, the signs had been there for months, really. The casual comments about my fixed income. The subtle suggestions that I was being reckless with my finances. The way they'd started treating my modest inheritance from Harold like it belonged to all of us. Harold had been careful and left me comfortable but by no means wealthy. The Italy trip would take a significant chunk of my discretionary savings. And somehow Brandon and Jessica had convinced themselves that money was theirs to influence. I remember calling Margaret after one particularly uncomfortable dinner when Jessica spent the entire night criticizing the restaurant I'd chosen, saying it was too expensive for what you get. Margaret listened with the patience of a woman who'd known me for 40 years, Olivia. She finally said, "That girl is already spending your money in her head." Mark my words, I'd laughed it off then. Brandon was my son, the little boy I'd raised to be honest and kind. Yes, he'd married a woman who was more high maintenance than I'd have chosen. But that didn't make him a thief. Family didn't steal from family. The travel agent had been so enthusiastic when I made the final payment. "Mrs. Richardson, you're going to have the time of your life," she'd gushed. "September is absolutely magical in Italy. You picked the perfect time." I'd walked out of her office feeling invincible. Like I was finally taking back control of my own story. The Italy trip represented everything I wanted to reclaim: independence, adventure, the courage to live fully despite loss. Looking back now, I realized that was exactly when Brandon and Jessica ramped up their campaign. The phone calls became more frequent, always with some new financial crisis that needed immediate attention. Jessica's mysterious health problems that required expensive treatments. Brandon's car troubles that supposedly couldn't wait for their next paycheck. I helped with small amounts at first, telling myself it was temporary, that they'd pay me back. But each request got a little bigger, a little more urgent, a little more emotionally manipulative. And I, desperate to feel needed by my son, fell for every single lie. The cruel irony was that they'd trained me to become their personal ATM, using my own love against me. Every dollar I gave them felt like proof that I was a good mother, a supportive family member, someone worth keeping around. I thought I was buying their affection, but really, I was financing my own betrayal. That's when I realized how deep their lies went. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing my Italy packing list. Brandon's voice was shaky, panicked in a way I'd never heard before. My maternal instincts kicked in immediately, pushing aside the nagging doubts that had been growing stronger each day. "Mom, I need your help," he said, skipping any greeting. "Jessica's in serious trouble." I set my coffee cup down, fully alert. "What kind of trouble?" "She owes money to some very dangerous people. Gambling debts. They're threatening to hurt her if she doesn't pay by Friday." The words hit me like a physical blow. Gambling debts. Jessica had never mentioned anything beyond the occasional lottery ticket. But the terror in Brandon's voice was real, and my son had never been a good liar. Or so I'd thought. "How much money?" I asked, though part of me already feared the answer. 13,000. His voice cracked on the number. "Mom, I know it's a lot, but these people, they're not playing games. They showed up at our house yesterday. Jessica's been hiding in the bedroom ever since." $13,000. Almost exactly the amount I'd saved for Italy. The coincidence should have been a giant red flag. But my mind was too flooded with fear to think straight. Images of Jessica being hurt, my son helpless to protect his wife, those thoughts drowned out every logical doubt I should have had. "Brandon, have you gone to the police? And tell them what? That my wife owes money to loan sharks. They'll just say it's a civil matter until someone gets hurt." "Mom, I'm scared. Really scared." I could hear him crying. My strong, capable son reduced to tears by circumstances he said were beyond his control. The sound broke something in me. This was my child, my baby boy, the same one who used to run to me after nightmares. If he needed me, I would move mountains for him. "Okay," I heard myself say. "Okay, we'll figure this out." How did Jessica even get involved with these people? "It started small," Brandon explained. "Online poker, sports betting. She said she was just having fun, blowing off steam, but then she started losing. And instead of stopping, she kept doubling down, trying to win back what she'd lost. You know how she gets when she's stressed." I did know. Jessica had always been the type to shop when she was upset, to make impulsive decisions when overwhelmed. It wasn't hard to believe she'd gotten in over her head with gambling. People made poor choices when they were struggling. "The guys who came to the house yesterday weren't exactly subtle," Brandon continued. "They made it very clear what would happen if Jessica doesn't pay." "Mom, I can't lose her. I can't." The desperation in his voice sealed my fate. This wasn't about money anymore, it was about protecting my family. Suddenly, the Italy trip felt selfish, frivolous compared to Jessica's safety. I could always take another vacation, but I couldn't replace Jessica if something happened to her. I have some savings, I said slowly. The money I'd put aside for my trip. I can't ask you to give up Italy for us. Brandon said, but he wasn't really protesting, was he? If he had truly been against taking my vacation money, he would have hung up, found some other way. Instead, he waited quietly while I talked myself into sacrificing my dreams for their crisis. Family comes first, I said, echoing the values Harold and I had tried to instill in him. Italy will still be there next year, Mom, you're saving our lives. I swear we'll pay you back as soon as possible with interest. Of course they would. Brandon was a good boy, raised right. He understood the value of money and the importance of keeping promises. This was just temporary, a one-time emergency that required extraordinary measures. I should have demanded proof photos of these threatening men. Copies of debt paperwork, something tangible beyond my son's terrified voice. But I was too busy being the mother he needed me to be. Too focused on playing my part in their crisis to ask the hard questions. I'll transfer the money today, I promised. But Brandon, Jessica needs to get help for this gambling problem. This can't happen again, absolutely. We've already looked into counseling programs. She's going to get the help she needs, such reasonable words. Such sensible plans. My son sounded like he had everything under control except for this one unfortunate situation. I even felt proud of him for protecting his wife, for being proactive, for sounding mature in the middle of a crisis. I hung up feeling like a hero. The good mother who stepped up when her family needed her most. Sure, I'd have to postpone my Italian adventure, but wasn't sacrifice what love was all about? Harold would have done the same if he were alive, within an hour. I transferred $13,000 to Brandon's account and called my travel agent to cancel my trip. The cancellation fees were substantial, but compared to Jessica's safety, they felt meaningless. I spent the rest of the day feeling righteously satisfied with my choice. When Margaret called that evening, I told her about the family emergency with the solemnity of someone who had just prevented a disaster, gambling debts. Margaret sounded skeptical. Since when does Jessica gamble? Apparently it started small and got out of hand. It happens to more people than you'd think. And these debt collectors just happened to demand exactly the amount you had saved for Italy. Margaret, I know what you're thinking, but Brandon was genuinely terrified. You should have heard his voice, if you say so, honey. I just hope those two appreciate what you've given up for them. I was sure they would. How could they not? I'd literally saved Jessica's life and preserved their marriage. They'd probably spend the rest of their lives grateful for my sacrifice. I had no idea I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life. The thank you text from Brandon came 3 hours after I transferred the money. Mom, you're an angel. Jessica's safe now. We love you so much. Short, sweet, and exactly what I needed to hear. For the first time in days, I finally felt like I could breathe normally. My family was safe, and I was the one who'd protected them. Yes, the Italy money was gone, but Jessica would be alive to thank me in person. And that felt like a fair trade. The next few days passed in a strange emotional limbo. Part of me quietly grieved the trip I'd looked forward to for so long. But a bigger part of me genuinely felt proud. I'd done the right thing. Whenever someone asked about my upcoming vacation, I calmly explained that I'd canceled it because of a family emergency, saying it with the quiet dignity of someone who'd made a noble sacrifice. Margaret, of course, didn't buy a word of it. She kept stopping by, asking sharper and sharper questions about Jessica's sudden gambling problem and the suspiciously perfect timing of everything. But I refused to question Brandon and Jessica. Family loyalty had to count for something, even if it cost me the trip of my dreams. At least they'll pay you back with interest, Margaret said during one of her visits. Though I noticed they haven't mentioned exactly when. They need time to get back on their feet. I defended. $13,000 is a lot to repay quickly. It's also a lot to lose gambling, especially for someone who supposedly just started playing online poker. I changed the subject, but her words stayed with me. When had Jessica even started gambling? Brandon hadn't been clear, and I realized I'd never once heard Jessica mention poker or sports betting. Still, people had private hobbies. Maybe she'd been embarrassed. By Thursday, curiosity got the better of me. I called Brandon to see how they were doing after everything. His phone went straight to voicemail. I tried Jessica, same thing. By Friday, worry started creeping back in. What if those debt collectors had come again? What if $13,000 hadn't been enough? Then on Saturday morning, Brandon finally sent a text, taking Jessica away for a few days to help her decompress. Thanks again for everything, Mom. You saved our marriage. A few days away made sense. Jessica had been through something traumatic and Brandon was being a good husband, getting her somewhere peaceful. I even felt a warm, satisfied glow thinking that my sacrifice had made all of this healing possible. But by Monday, that feeling started to unravel. Still no phone calls. No updates. No mention of counseling. When I drove past their house, the mail was piling up and their lawn sprinkler wasn't running. Brandon was always meticulous about home maintenance. Something was off. On Tuesday afternoon, I finally broke down and called Brandon's office. His assistant actually sounded surprised. "Oh, Mrs. Richardson, didn't Brandon tell you? He took 2 weeks of vacation time. Said it was a last-minute family situation." 2 weeks. Brandon had never taken 2 weeks off in his entire career. He'd check emails from his deathbed. Something about that didn't make sense. Did he mention where they were going? I asked, not specifically, but he seemed excited. Said it was a once-in-a-lifetime trip. A once-in-a-lifetime trip. The words hit me like a slap. That was exactly how I described Italy to everyone, my once-in-a-lifetime trip. The one I'd canceled to save Jessica from debt collectors who now felt increasingly imaginary. I drove straight to Margaret's house, probably committing several traffic offenses along the way. She opened the door, took one look at my face, and poured me a glass of wine without asking. "They're gone," I said before she even closed the door. Brandon took 2 weeks off work for a once-in-a-lifetime trip he never even mentioned to me. Margaret set down her glass. "Gone where? I don't know. But it's starting to feel like they used my money for their own vacation. While I'm here worrying about Jessica's gambling debts that probably never existed." "Oh, honey," her face twisted into a mix of sympathy and fury. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to find out exactly where they went and what they did with my money." It took less than an hour of digging. Jessica, bless her heart, had never met a social media platform she didn't adore. Her Instagram was private, but her Facebook was wide open, and the photos I found changed everything. The very first one appeared in my feed at exactly 3:47 p.m. on Wednesday. It hit me like a punch to the chest. Jessica, glowing in a flowing white sundress, standing at the bow of a cruise ship with the Mediterranean glittering behind her. The caption read, "Yay, one of our dream cruise." Couldn't be more grateful for this amazing surprise. My hands shook as I scrolled through the rest of the photos. Brandon feeding Jessica chocolate-covered strawberries by the pool. Jessica posing with a champagne flute in front of a sunset. That could only be somewhere in the Greek islands. Brandon in a tuxedo at what looked like a formal dinner, grinning like he'd hit the jackpot because in a way, he had. $13,000 of my carefully saved Italy money had paid for their luxury Mediterranean cruise. The same cruise I'd looked at months earlier and dismissed as too expensive for my budget. They were literally living my dream vacation while I sat in my kitchen in Portland, staring at empty savings accounts and feeling like the world's biggest fool. What gutted me most was how happy Jessica looked in every single photo. This wasn't a woman recovering from trauma. This wasn't someone terrified of debt collectors. This was someone having the time of her life, someone who clearly felt she'd pulled off the greatest victory imaginable. She'd manipulated her mother-in-law out of $13.00 and was proudly documenting the spoils for the world to see. I scrolled back through her posts from the past month, looking for any sign, any hint of the gambling problem that had supposedly spiraled out of control. Nothing, no poker references, no sports bets, no stress, no fear. Just the usual mix of restaurant meals, shopping trips, and complaints about being bored. My phone rang. Margaret's name lit up the screen. I answered without thinking. "Olivia, are you okay? You sounded upset when you left." "They're on a cruise," I said, my voice oddly calm. "A Mediterranean cruise that I paid for while they told me it was to save Jessica from loan sharks." Margaret didn't speak at first. When she finally did, her voice was sharp with anger. "Those calculating little thieves. How could Brandon do this to you?" "I don't know," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I realized that wasn't true. I did know. I just hadn't wanted to see it. Brandon had been testing my boundaries for years. Always with some urgent story attached. The car that needed emergency repairs. The medical bill insurance wouldn't cover. The business opportunity that needed fast cash. Every time, I'd written the check and believed him. Because I wanted to believe my son was a good man who just had bad luck. But good men don't steal their mother's dream vacation. Good men don't traumatize their mothers with lies about their wives being threatened by criminals. Good men don't post photos of their fraud on social media, while their victims sit at home worried sick. "What are you going to do?" Margaret asked. I stared at the latest picture Jessica had posted, her and Brandon toasting each other at dinner. Both tan, relaxed, and completely content with their betrayal. The caption read, "So grateful my husband surprised me with this incredible trip." Sometimes the best adventures are the ones you never planned, a surprise trip. Of course, Jessica probably had no idea the money came from me. In her mind, Brandon was the thoughtful husband who'd whisked her away on a romantic cruise. She got to be the grateful wife. And I got to be the fool. I'm going to make them pay, I said quietly. Good. Do you want me to come over? Not yet. I need to think. Really think about the best way to handle this. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and stared at those photos until my eyes burned. The anger inside me grew slowly, like a storm building far out at sea. They had looked me in the eye and lied. They had used my love for my son against me. They had turned my generosity into their personal vacation fund. The old Olivia would have called Brandon immediately, crying, begging for answers, giving him room to spin another story and somehow twist the blame back onto me. But the woman staring at her son's betrayal felt something completely different. Cold, calculated fury. If they wanted to play games with my money, then I would show them what consequences looked like. The next photo showed them parasailing over crystal blue water. Jessica's arms spread wide like she was embracing the world. My world, my money, my sacrificed dreams. I took a screenshot of every single photo, building an evidence file of their betrayal. By the time I was done, I had documentation of every meal, every excursion, every moment of joy they'd stolen from me. They thought they were so clever, posting their fraud for everyone to see. They had no idea they'd just handed me everything I needed to destroy them. What I discovered next made my blood run cold. The credit card statement arrived in my mailbox Thursday morning, and at first I almost tossed it without opening it. It was for the emergency card, the one I barely used, the one that usually sat with a zero balance. But something made me tear open the envelope anyway. Maybe the same instinct that had been whispering warnings about Brandon and Jessica for months. The balance was $4,457. I stared at the number, my brain refusing to process it. I hadn't used that card in more than 6 months. The last charge had been for a new washing machine when mine gave out. So how was there nearly $5,000 in charges I'd never made? My hands trembled as I scanned the line items: airline tickets to Miami, travel insurance, shore excursion packages in Santorini and Mykonos, ship-to-shore Wi-Fi bundles. Every charge was from the week before. Brandon's panicked phone call about Jessica's so-called gambling debts. They hadn't just stolen my Italy money, they had used my credit card to upgrade their stolen vacation, expensive excursions, premium add-ons, luxuries. While I sat at home thinking Jessica was hiding from violent debt collectors, the timeline made sickening sense now. Brandon had planned this cruise for weeks, maybe months. The gambling debt story was just the cover to extract the cash they needed. For the basic cruise package, I called the credit card company, my fingers barely steady enough to dial. The customer service representative was sympathetic but firm. All the charges had been made with the correct security codes and billing zip code. Someone with full access to my card details had used it, someone who knew exactly when I'd be too distracted to check my statements. Do you have any family members who might have access to your card information? The representative asked. Yes, I whispered. I do. Brandon had helped me organize my finances after Harold died. He'd sat right in my kitchen, going through every bank account and credit card, helping me set up online access and autopay. He'd written down all my passwords and security information for emergencies. I'd thought it was sweet, my son protecting me while I was grieving. Now I realized it had been reconnaissance. I hung up and immediately called my bank. My checking account showed 2 additional unauthorized transfers in the past month, both to online gambling sites. Small amounts, just a few $100s each, but the pattern was unmistakable. Brandon had been testing my security, seeing how long it would take me to notice something was wrong. When I didn't catch the gambling charges, he'd felt confident enough to go for the big score. The cruelest part was the gambling story itself. He'd actually used my credit card to place those small online bets, creating a paper trail that backed up his lie. If I had demanded proof of Jessica's gambling problem, he could have shown me my own statements as evidence. My son had stolen from me, lied to me, and framed me for the very crime he was committing. The boy I'd raised to value honesty and integrity had turned into a manipulator who saw his own mother as nothing but a financial resource to exploit. I sat in my kitchen, staring at the evidence, feeling something deep inside me shift. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about respect, about family, about simple human decency, something Brandon and Jessica clearly believed I didn't deserve. But they'd made one fatal mistake. They got greedy. If they'd stopped at my Italy money, I might eventually have forgiven them. Family loyalty runs deep, and I'd already proven I was willing to sacrifice my dreams for theirs. But the credit card charges showed intention, calculation, and contempt that couldn't be excused. This wasn't a desperate son making a poor decision under pressure. This was premeditated theft by someone who'd studied my financial habits. and deliberately taken advantage of them. Someone who'd sat in my kitchen accepted my kindness and planned my ruin while smiling in my face. Margaret arrived minutes after I called her. She took one look at the credit card statement and said exactly what I was thinking. That son of a, it gets worse, I interrupted, showing her the bank records. He's been stealing from me for weeks, maybe months. Small charges. Testing me, and now they're living it up on your dime, she said. Her voice shaking with fury while posting photos of their perfect vacation. I nodded, feeling that cold fury harden into something sharper. More focused. Margaret, I need your help, I said. I'm going to make them pay for this, but I need to be smart about it. No more emotional reactions. No more giving them the benefit of the doubt. What do you need? She asked. I need to know everything about that cruise, where they're going, when they're coming back, what they've planned for when they get home. And I need to know it without them realizing I'm investigating. Margaret smiled. And for the first time in days, I felt like I might actually win this fight. Honey, you've come to the right person. I didn't spend 40 years teaching high school without learning how to catch cheaters. We spent the next 3 hours building a complete picture of their vacation timeline. The cruise was 12 days, returning to Miami on Saturday morning. They'd booked a hotel for Saturday night, probably to recover from the trip before flying home Sunday, which meant they'd walk through their front door Sunday evening still glowing from their stolen vacation and expecting me to welcome them back like the grateful mother who'd saved their marriage. They had no idea I'd spent the entire week uncovering every detail of their betrayal. They didn't know about the credit card statements or the banking records, or the carefully documented timeline proving their guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. Most importantly, they had no idea what I was planning for their homecoming. That's when I knew exactly what I had to do. Sunday evening arrived with the punctuality of a funeral service. I'd spent the entire weekend preparing for Brandon and Jessica's return, and by 6:30, I was seated in my living room chair with a clear view of their driveway. Margaret sat beside me, armed with a thermos of coffee and the grim satisfaction of someone about to witness justice. You sure you don't want me to stay for the actual confrontation? She asked for the third time. I need to handle this alone, I said, watching their house for any sign of life. But thank you for everything. I couldn't have done this without you. At 7:15, Brandon's Honda pulled into their driveway. Even from my window, I could see they were both tan and relaxed, moving with the lazy contentment of people returning from the vacation of a lifetime. My vacation. My $13,000 plus the $4,000 in credit card charges I was still disputing. Jessica stretched in the passenger seat like a cat, probably working out the kinks from their long travel day. Brandon pulled the suitcases from the trunk. They were laughing at something I couldn't hear. They looked like any other couple coming home from a romantic getaway, not thieves who'd spent 2 weeks living it up on stolen money. I waited exactly 30 minutes before walking across the street and ringing their doorbell, just long enough for them to start unpacking, to relax into the comfortable assumption that they'd gotten away with it. Brandon opened the door, looking genuinely surprised. Mom, what are you doing here? I wanted to welcome you home, I said pleasantly. I've been so worried about Jessica. How is she feeling after her traumatic experience with those debt collectors? For a moment, confusion flickered across his face. Then I watched him remember the lie he'd told, the performance he'd have to continue. She's doing much better, he said. The time away really helped her recover. I'm so glad to hear that. May I come in? I brought some photos I thought you might enjoy seeing. Jessica appeared behind Brandon, looking every bit as sun-kissed and relaxed as she had in her social media photos. Olivia, what a nice surprise. You didn't need to come check on us. Oh, but I did, I said, stepping into their living room without waiting for an invitation. I have so much to share with you both. I pulled out my phone and began scrolling through the screenshots I'd saved from Jessica's Facebook page. I was so relieved to see that Jessica was safe and healthy, I said. In fact, she looked absolutely radiant in all her vacation photos. The silence that followed was instant and deafening. Jessica's face went white, then red, then white again. Brandon looked like he was trying to solve a complex math problem in his head, probably calculating just how much trouble they were in. I can explain, Brandon started. I held up a hand. Oh, I'm sure you can. You're quite talented at explanations. But first, let me show you some of my own photos. I pulled out the printed credit card statements and bank records I'd organized. These, I said, are pictures of charges made to my accounts while you were supposedly dealing with Jessica's gambling crisis. Airline tickets, shore excursions, ship Wi-Fi packages, all purchased with my credit card during the week. Before you called me about Jessica's life-threatening debt, Brandon sat down heavily on the couch. Jessica stayed standing, but I could see her hands shaking. Mom, I can explain everything. Brandon tried again. It's not what it looks like, really? Because it looks like you planned a Mediterranean cruise, realized you couldn't afford it, and decided to steal the money from your mother. It looks like you used my credit card without permission to upgrade your stolen vacation. It looks like you traumatized me with fake stories about your wife being threatened by criminals while you were actually booking dinner reservations and spa treatments. Jessica finally found her voice. Olivia, you don't understand the whole situation, then please enlighten me. Help me understand how stealing $13,000 from your mother-in-law somehow makes sense. The fight drained out of Brandon all at once. His shoulders slumped, and suddenly he looked like the guilty little boy I remembered from his childhood. Caught with his hand in the cookie jar, we needed the vacation, he said quietly. Our marriage was falling apart, and we thought time away might help us reconnect. So you decided I should pay for your marriage counseling cruise. We were going to pay you back. Jessica added quickly. We just needed some time to get our finances sorted out. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. With what money, Brandon? I've seen your credit report. You're maxed out on every card you have. You're behind on your mortgage, your car payment, and apparently your student loans. You can't afford to pay me back because you can't afford anything. That's when the real truth finally surfaced. You think we don't deserve nice things because we're not perfect with money? Jessica snapped. Her mask of remorse slipped completely, revealing the entitled woman I'd suspected was hiding underneath. You have more money than you could spend in your lifetime, just sitting in your house collecting dust while you obsess over your stupid Italy trip, Jessica. Brandon warned. But she was far past pretending. No, Brandon, I'm tired of pretending. Your mother acts like we're criminals for needing help. But she's the one hoarding money while her own family struggles. She could have paid for that cruise 10 times over without missing a meal. The audacity stole my breath. Hoarding money? I worked for 43 years as a teacher, saved every penny I could, and lived modestly so I could enjoy my retirement. That's not hoarding. That's planning, and what good did all that planning do you? Jessica shot back. You sit in that house by yourself talking to your neighbor about trips you're too scared to actually take. At least we used the money to create memories. You used stolen money to create memories. I corrected. And apparently you think that's acceptable because I'm old and alone, and couldn't possibly have dreams worth respecting. Brandon tried, weakly, to regain control. Mom. Jessica's upset. She doesn't mean oh, I mean every word. Jessica cut in. Your mother guilts you every chance she gets, makes you feel responsible for her loneliness, and then acts like the victim when we finally ask for help. She's been manipulating you for years. The projection was breathtaking. Here stood a woman who'd helped steal $17,000 from me, accusing me of manipulation. But her outburst also revealed something I'd long suspected but never been able to prove. This hadn't been Brandon's idea originally. Interesting perspective, I said calmly. Tell me, Jessica, whose idea was it to use my credit card for the vacation extras? She glanced at Brandon, realizing too late she'd said more than she intended. That's not relevant. I think it is. You see, I've been wondering how Brandon had access to my complete financial information. Yes, he helped me organize my accounts after Harold died. But the credit card I keep for emergencies was never part of that conversation. That card stayed in my purse, and the only time anyone else handled it was I paused, letting the memory settle. Last Christmas, when you offered to help me pay for dinner at that expensive restaurant, you took my card to the register while I was in the bathroom. Brandon looked at his wife with something like surprise or perhaps betrayal. Hard to tell which. You photographed my card information, I continued. Probably the front and back. Maybe even the security code. That's how you knew my zip code, my full card number, everything you needed to make online purchases. You can't prove that, Jessica said, but her voice had lost all conviction. Actually, I can. I called the credit card company and requested detailed information about where those charges originated, IP addresses, device information, geographical location. Would you like to guess where the airline tickets were purchased? Silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Brandon was staring at Jessica now with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger exactly, something colder, more calculating. Like he was finally seeing his wife clearly for the first time. From this house, I continued. From your home computer, Jessica. Which means you've been planning this theft for months, waiting for the right opportunity to take a large amount of money from me. That's enough, Brandon said quietly, but he wasn't talking to me. Jessica must have heard something dangerous in his tone, because her posture shifted immediately. Brandon, honey, don't let her turn us against each other. We're a team, remember? It's us against the world, is it? Brandon asked. Because right now it feels like you used me to steal from my mother, and you're expecting me to cover for you. The dynamic in the room shifted right in front of us. Jessica had overplayed her hand, showing too much of her involvement. Brandon might be a liar and a thief, but he was also slowly recognizing just how deeply his wife had manipulated him just as thoroughly as they'd manipulated me. "You planned this," he said, his voice gaining strength. "The gambling debt story, using mom's card, everything. This wasn't a desperate mistake. It was a calculated con. Don't be ridiculous." Jessica tried to laugh. "We planned it together." "No, we didn't," Brandon said flatly. "I wanted to ask mom for a loan for the cruise. You said she'd never agree to pay for something that expensive, that we needed a better story. You came up with the gambling debt idea." I watched my son put together the pieces of his wife's manipulation with a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because Jessica was finally being exposed for who she truly was. Sadness because Brandon was realizing his marriage might be built on lies, as elaborate as the ones they'd told me, but none of that excused his choices. Manipulation or not, he'd still looked me in the eye and lied. He'd still terrified me with stories of Jessica being threatened. He'd still chosen his wife's schemes over his mother's trust. And that was when I dropped the real blow. "The good news," I said, pulling out the manila folder I'd saved for this exact moment, "is that I've already taken care of everything." Brandon and Jessica exchanged glances, uncertain if I meant I'd forgiven them or called the police. The truth was far more elegant than either possibility. "You see, when I discovered your theft, I had a choice. I could report you to the authorities, which would almost certainly result in criminal charges, and destroy what's left of our family. Or I could handle this privately in a way that ensures you never steal from me again, while also protecting Brandon from the worst consequences of his terrible judgment." I opened the folder and spread its contents. Across their coffee table, bank statements, legal documents, my correspondence with credit card companies, and most importantly, a detailed accounting of every dollar they'd taken. $17,437, I said. "That's the total amount you stole from me. The cruise cost, the credit card charges, and the fraudulent gambling transactions you used to support your lie." Jessica leaned forward, flipping through the pages, her face draining of color. "What is all this?" "Evidence," I said calmly. "Documentation. A complete paper trail of your theft, timestamps, IP addresses, bank records, everything showing exactly what you did and when you did it." I smiled pleasantly. "I've been quite thorough, Mom," Brandon began. I held up my hand. "I'm not finished." As I said, I had a choice about how to handle this, and I chose the option that protects my interests while giving you both a chance to avoid criminal prosecution. I pulled out the final document, a legal agreement drafted by Margaret's lawyer. "Nephew, this is a promissory note for the full amount you stole, plus interest, to be repaid over the next 2 years. The payments are based on Brandon's current salary, so I know they're manageable if you adjust your lifestyle accordingly." Brandon picked up the note, scanning it with growing alarm. 2 years? "Mom, this payment schedule is huge. We'll have to cut everything." "Yes," I said simply. "You will. No more expensive dinners. No more shopping sprees. No more vacations you can't afford. You'll live like the working class people you actually are, instead of the wealthy couple you've been pretending to be with my money." "And if we refuse to sign?" Jessica asked, though her tone already betrayed the answer she feared. "Then I file a police report tomorrow morning. Credit card fraud, elder financial abuse, theft by deception." Margaret's nephew assures me that with this level of documentation, prosecution would be straightforward. You'd likely face felony charges. Brandon would lose his job, and you'd both have criminal records that would follow you for the rest of your lives. Silence filled the room, broken only by the ticking of their mantel clock. I could practically see the calculations happening behind their eyes as they searched for some angle, some escape hatch, some loophole that might save them. "There's one more thing," I added. The promissory note had a clause stating that if they missed even one payment, the entire balance would become due immediately, and I'd be free to pursue criminal charges retroactively. This wasn't just about getting my money back. It was about proving they'd learned to live within their means. Jessica was now reading over Brandon's shoulder, her face tight with barely contained fury. "This is vindictive, Olivia. You're destroying our quality of life over money you don't even need." "I'm protecting myself from future theft," I corrected, "and teaching you both that actions have consequences. You chose to steal from me, so now you get to live with the results of that choice." "We could fight this," Jessica said. "Claim you gave us the money willingly." "You could try," I said. "But you'd have to explain the credit card fraud, the forged gambling transactions, and the elaborate lies about debt collectors. Plus, I have recordings of some very interesting conversations. That part wasn't entirely true, but their guilty expressions told me they weren't sure what I might have recorded." "Let them worry about it. Brandon set the promissory note down and looked at me with something I hadn't seen in years: respect. Not affection. Not gratitude. Respect, the recognition that I was someone to be taken seriously. You've thought of everything, he said quietly. I've learned to protect myself, I replied. Something I should have done years ago. Jessica, still searching for an angle, pushed on. What about the cruise? We can't undo that. Shouldn't we get some credit for the money that's already spent? You should get credit for the memories you made with stolen money, I laughed. No, Jessica. You're paying back every penny you stole. And every time you look at those vacation photos, you'll remember exactly what they cost our family. That was when Brandon asked the question I'd been waiting for. What happens after we pay you back? Do we have a relationship anymore, or is this just business? I looked at my son, this man I'd raised to be honest and kind, who had chosen to become a liar and a thief. The little boy who used to bring me dandelions and call them flowers. The teenager who'd promised to take care of me when I got old. The adult who'd stolen my dreams to fund his wife's fantasies. That depends, I said finally, on whether you prove you're capable of being the man I tried to raise you to be. But neither of us was prepared for what Jessica said next. Fine, she snapped, her voice sharp as broken glass. We'll sign your precious contract and pay back every penny. But don't pretend this makes you the victim. She stepped closer. Olivia, you want to know the truth? We've been supporting you emotionally for years while you drained us financially. Brandon turned to her like she'd suddenly lost her mind. Jessica, what are you talking about? Your mother, she said, staring straight at me, has been guilt-tripping you about money and attention for years. Every holiday, every birthday, every family gathering, it's always about how lonely she is, how worried she is about her finances, how she sacrifices for everyone else. She trained you to feel responsible for her happiness, then act shocked when we actually need help. The lies were breathtaking. I've never asked Brandon for financial support, I said evenly. No. You just make comments about how expensive things are, how fixed incomes don't stretch, how you don't know how you'll afford home repairs. You manipulate through martyrdom and then play innocent when people respond to your hints. Something cold settled in my stomach. These weren't random accusations. She was describing real conversations, private moments between me and Brandon that I had always thought were normal mother-son exchanges about life. You've been telling her about our private conversations, I said to Brandon. He had the grace to look ashamed. She's my wife, Mom. We talk about everything, Jessica repeated, including how your mother mentions needing a new roof or worrying about property taxes, or how she's not sure she can maintain that big house by herself. She kept going, her voice rising with momentum. You share all of it with me, and then you feel guilty because you can't afford to fix every one of her problems. That's not manipulation, I protested. That's normal conversation between family members, is it? Jessica challenged. Or is it a pattern of making your son feel responsible for things he can't solve? She pulled out her phone and started scrolling. Brandon, remember after Thanksgiving, when you told me how guilty you felt because your mom mentioned her heating bill being higher than expected? Brandon's face flushed. Jessica, don't. Or when she said cruise prices had gone up and she might have to wait another year for Italy? You felt terrible because you knew she'd been saving forever. But we couldn't afford to give her thousands of dollars. I stared at my son, the realization hitting me with sickening clarity. You felt obligated to help me afford Italy. You seemed so disappointed, Brandon said quietly. You'd worked so hard to save for that trip. And then prices increased right when you were ready to book. You didn't ask for money directly, but you heard it as a request for help. I finished for him. And when you couldn't afford to help, you felt guilty. So when the opportunity came up to borrow the money temporarily, Jessica added, it felt like we were solving your problem and ours at the same time. You'd get your Italy trip eventually, and we'd get the vacation our marriage needed. The reinterpretation was masterful and completely wrong, but I could see how it might have twisted Brandon's conscience. Jessica had taken his genuine love for me and warped it into something that justified theft. She'd made him believe stealing my money was actually a favor to me. Except you weren't borrowing, I pointed out. You were stealing. And you had no intention of telling me the truth or paying me back. We would have paid you back, Brandon insisted. Eventually, with what money? I asked. You're barely making your current bills. That was when Jessica played her final card. With the money we'll inherit when you die. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Brandon went white, staring at his wife as though she'd just revealed herself to be a total stranger. I felt something inside me go very still and very cold. Excuse me? Oh, come on, Olivia, she said. You're 67 years old. Statistically, you have maybe 15 years left. That house, your savings, your retirement accounts, they're all going to Brandon anyway. We were just accelerating the timeline a little bit, Jessica, Brandon whispered, horrified. But she was beyond stopping. Your money is going to be ours eventually. So what's the difference if we use some of it now, when we actually need it? At least this way, we get to enjoy it together instead of waiting for you to die first. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear my own heartbeat, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint traffic outside yet inside the room. Nothing moved except the slow destruction of whatever relationship we had left. Brandon stared at Jessica like he was seeing her for the first time. You planned this based on inheriting my mom's money when she dies? I planned this based on reality, Jessica shot back. Your mother isn't going to live forever, and when she's gone, we'll need that money for our own retirement. I just suggested we treat it like an advance on our inheritance. An advance you decided to take without asking, I said. My voice steadied despite the fury rising in my chest. Would you have said yes if we had asked? She challenged. Absolutely not, exactly. So we took what we needed and planned to replace it before you noticed. If you hadn't been so obsessive about checking your accounts, this never would have been a problem. I looked at the woman my son married, this person who had helped steal my money, and justified it as an early payout on my death, and I realized I'd been far too generous in my punishment. Jessica, I said quietly, you've just made a very expensive mistake. That was when I told them what was really going to happen. I set down the promissory note and pulled out a different document from my folder. I'm afraid there's been a change in plans. Both Brandon and Jessica leaned forward, sensing that whatever came next would be much worse than what they'd expected. You see, Jessica, I continued, when you mentioned inheriting my money, you revealed something crucial about your motivation. You didn't steal from me because you were desperate or panicking. You stole from me because you believe my assets are yours by right, just not available on your preferred timeline. I unfolded the new document and placed it on their coffee table. This is a revised version of my will, drafted this morning after I spoke with my attorney. Brandon's face went ashen. Mom, what did you do? I protected my assets from future theft, I said simply. The original will left everything to you, Brandon, because I believed you were an honest man who would honor my memory and use that inheritance responsibly. Recent events have proven that assumption incorrect. Jessica snatched up the will, her eyes scanning frantically for her name. When she didn't find it, she looked for Brandon's. The longer she read, the more her face contorted with rage. You can't do this, she hissed. You can't leave everything to charity out of spite. I'm not leaving everything to charity, I corrected. I'm establishing a trust fund for my grandchildren's education, managed by independent trustees. So the money will be used only for legitimate educational expenses. Brandon will receive a modest inheritance, enough to be meaningful, but not enough to support a lifestyle he can't afford on his own. Brandon was reading over her shoulder now, his face shifting through disbelief, anger, and of all things something that looked like relief. How much is modest? Jessica demanded. $50,000, I said. The rest, approximately $400,000 in assets, will fund college educations for your children and any future grandchildren I might have. Jessica threw the will down like it was contaminated. This is insane. We're your family. We're the ones who'll take care of you when you're old and sick. Really? I asked. Based on what evidence? You've already shown me exactly how you'll take care of me when you want money for vacations. You can't afford. That's different, Brandon said, though even he didn't seem convinced. Is it? I asked. Jessica just told me she considers my money an advance payment on my death. She's literally counting on me dying so she can spend my life savings. How is that different from elder abuse? The question hung between us while they processed the weight of it. I'd spent 3 days turning Jessica's revelation over in my mind. Every angle led to the same conclusion: they would absolutely steal from me again. Probably in increasing amounts as they got older and more desperate. This isn't fair. Jessica said. You made one mistake? No, I corrected. You made a series of calculated decisions over several months. You studied my financial habits. You stole my credit card information. You created fake gambling transactions to support your lies. You traumatized me with stories about threats to your safety. And you spent my money while documenting your theft on social media. That isn't one mistake, Jessica. That's a criminal enterprise. Brandon finally found his voice. What about the promissory note? Do we still have to pay you back? Oh, absolutely, I said. That debt doesn't disappear just because your inheritance does. You still owe me $17,437 plus interest to be paid over 2 years. So we pay you back money that won't even come to us when you die anyway. Jessica's voice was climbing to dangerous octaves. That's correct, I said calmly. You pay me back because you stole from me. And theft has consequences regardless of your future Expectations. I stood and gathered my documents with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has just delivered checkmate. I'll give you both 24 hours to decide whether you want to sign the promissory note or face criminal charges. But either way, my will stands as written. This is vindictive, Jessica spat. You're punishing us for being honest about the inheritance. I'm protecting my assets from people who've proven they can't be trusted with them, I replied. The children will get good educations. Which is exactly what I would have wanted my money to accomplish. Brandon walked me to the door, his expression a mix of resignation and something that looked surprisingly like respect. I guess I deserve this, he said quietly. You deserve consequences for your choices, I agreed. What you do with those consequences is up to you. As I walked home, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not happy, not exactly. It's hard to be happy when your relationship with your son has been cracked beyond repair. But I felt settled, strong. Final. Margaret was waiting in my kitchen with a bottle of wine and a knowing smile. How did it go? Better than expected, I said. Jessica revealed more than she intended. Brandon finally saw who he married. And the will is changed. The kids will get educations instead of enabling their parents' poor judgment. Margaret raised her glass. To consequences, I echoed. 3 months later, I was sipping wine on a terrace in Tuscany, watching the sunset paint the hills gold and amber. I'd booked the trip to Italy using money from the first payment on Brandon and Jessica's promissory note. There was a certain poetic justice in funding my dream vacation with money they were forced to repay. After stealing that same dream from me. My phone buzzed with a text from Brandon. Mom, I signed the divorce papers today. I'm sorry for everything. Maybe when I finish paying you back, we can try to rebuild our relationship. I typed back, maybe we can. Enjoy your fresh start. Some relationships can't be rebuilt, but some people can learn to be better. I was curious to see which path my son would choose. The waiter brought my dinner, handmade pasta with truffles. That probably cost more than Jessica spent on groceries in a week. As I ate, I thought about the woman I'd been 3 months earlier, lonely, trusting, eager to be needed even by people who didn't deserve my generosity. That woman was gone. In her place was someone who finally understood that love without boundaries isn't love at all, it's enablement. I'd finally learned the difference between being a good mother and being a doormat. The Italian sunset was worth waiting 67 years to see. Some things are worth the wait, especially when you're enjoying them with money that was rightfully yours all along. I raised my glass to the sunset, to fresh starts, and to the beautiful truth that it's never too late to stop letting people take advantage of your kindness. The view from the other side of betrayal I discovered was absolutely spectacular. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.